They hit the United States, moved in northern Mississippi tonight, slowed and weakened, but it left behind it a wake of death and devastation. At least 22 people killed in Mississippi and Louisiana, hundreds injured in those states and Alabama. Hundreds of fires burning out of control because fire engines cannot get through. Communications disrupted and some communities almost completely flattened by the storm, which generated winds up to 200 miles an hour. Thousands have lost their homes and are refugees. Two of the communities hardest hit were Gulfport and Biloxi, Mississippi.
The first high wind and seas of Hurricane Camille hit the Gulf coasts of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama yesterday afternoon. Roads washed out, electric power and telephone lines were cut off. Many people here have lived through hurricanes before, and when Camille began to blow in, they fled their homes for high ground, inland, to ride out the storm with relatives, friends, and at emergency shelters. Today, the hurricane moved northward and lost strength, leaving behind a wake of destruction. So far, at least 22 people are known to have died, most of them here in Biloxi, Mississippi. Hundreds were injured. Local officials couldn't begin to handle the casualties, the homeless persons, and the damage. The National Guard was mobilized to help with these problems and to prevent looting. The main highway along the Gulf Coast was badly torn up by wind and waves, and this hampered rescue and relief operations. Some towns are still so completely cut off by road and by telephone that it's not possible to say how badly they were hurt. At least 2 towns are thought to have been totally leveled. One of the towns hit hardest was Gulfport, Mississippi, a sandy resort east of New Orleans. Almost every store in the business section was destroyed or badly damaged.
I don't remember anything in my lifetime, anything like. Impossible to believe, really incredible. Absolutely incredible. Fury. 30 years, I've never seen anything like it.
When did you come back and find it this way?
Well, we had a permission this morning from the police department to come down and survey the damage, you know. But it doesn't look like there's anything to survey, does it? Right? In one and out the other end.
What did you think when you saw it this morning?
After 25 years, what do you think?
Houses and house trailers in this area, especially the ones directly on the beach, also were heavily damaged. When they returned after the storm, thousands of people found only rubble where their homes stood yesterday. Whenever you're ready. Ron, Nestor.
700 miles east of Puerto Rico, another hurricane called Debbie grew in strength, and the government flew planes into the eye of the storm, dropping chemicals into it. Silver iodide crystals, which scientists hope would cause water to form around them, turn to ice, and take away from the storm the heat needed to fuel it.
The Huntley Brinkley Report is produced by NBC News and brought to you in color by the makers of Absorbing Junior. It soaks away aches and pains like a warm bath.
Fungus ready, sir. Yeah, itch is ready, sir. I want those athletes' foot flags between the enemy toes by nightfall. Now move out. It's your first battle, kid. Yeah, nothing to it. We got him scratching like crazy. Oh, no. He's got Absorbing Junior. We've had it. Just no way to fight Absorbing Junior. It stops itch fast, kills fungus on contact. Chemical warfare. How low can you get?
Absorbing Junior, liquid or powder.
It was quiet today in Northern Ireland as some of the dead were buried, British Army forces kept the peace, and people began picking up the debris. 4 Catholic and 2 Protestant funerals were held for victims of the fighting in Belfast. The British Army commander, Lieutenant General Sir Ian Freeland, told newsmen that 2,000 more troops are being sent in to raise his forces to 6,000. Freeland said his troops are now enjoying a welcome from both Protestants and Catholics, but that it could end at any moment, and particularly if the political leadership of Northern Ireland and Britain fail to work out something. In some parts of Northern Ireland today, Protestant and Catholic citizens were working together in vigilante groups to turn back the extremists.
All week long, they threw bricks at each other, shot and killed each other, and burned out the others' homes with gasoline bombs. But Sunday, they put on their best clothes, picked their way through the wreckage they created with their violence, through the barricades erected to keep them apart, and went to church to contemplate it all. This is Crumlin Road, or what's left of it, in the Ardoyne district of Belfast. Until British troops moved in and interposed themselves between the two factions, Crumlin Road was the scene of some of the worst of the violence in Belfast. Since the troops arrived, things have been quiet.
On a Saturday night, after the pubs had closed, a crowd would form on both sides of the road in Disraeli Street and Hooker Street, and you would get shouting starting at each other, and then the odd bottle thrown, and then the odd stone thrown.
So the Catholics were there?
Correct, over on Hooker Street down here.
And the Protestants were right over here?
Absolutely right.
And the fighting started?
The fighting would always start, and then apparently the police always used the same tactics and came straight up Crumlin Road from Belfast itself into the area here, by which time the Protestants had got the message they would pull out, and the Catholics would stay there shouting, and they'd get a hammering. And this, of course, has created a lot of tension.
Holy Cross Catholic Church is on the Protestant side of Crumlin Road, so its parishioners must cross the boundary line to worship.
What will you tell your parishioners this Sunday morning?
Well, this Sunday morning, everyone reflects the relief of the tension that has prevailed, especially for the last 3 or 4 days. All the people here, none of them have slept for days. They've been living in constant fear. And our main message this morning is to be grateful to God and to the soldiers that we have had peace in our district, and we're asking them to cooperate fully with them in every way.
Woodvale Presbyterian Church is about 2 blocks away from Holy Cross Catholic Church, and its minister is just as troubled and as emotionally exhausted as the Catholic rector.
Is it possible for Catholics and Protestants to live together peacefully ever in Northern Ireland?
It is. It is very possible, and in fact it must be done. And in many, many areas of our society it is being done.
Reverend, a greater part of this week they spent a lot of time throwing rocks and firebombs at each other. What went wrong?
What goes wrong in any society? What goes wrong in your society? Just fear, prejudice built up over centuries, people reacting because of rumor, because of background. This always goes wrong. It's happening in America, happening in Vietnam, happening in Russia and China. Always happens. It's happening here.
What happens when the troops leave?
That, of course, I don't know.
So most people seem to think that someday Catholics and Protestants can live together peacefully in Northern Ireland. Someday. But for the time being, the quiet that prevails here is due to the presence of these armed British soldiers, and everybody's afraid of what's going to happen when they leave. Douglas Kiker, NBC News, Belfast.
Northern Ireland's Premier, James Chichester Clark, brought Catholic and Protestant community leaders together today in Belfast to discuss ways of easing the tension. Chichester Clark is scheduled to meet British Prime Minister Wilson tomorrow in London. Catholic leaders have warned there'll be continued trouble if the political leadership attempts to return to the old conditions, that something must be done now to advance the rights and opportunities of the Catholics. Patrick J. Hillary, Foreign Minister for the Irish Republic, talked today with UN Secretary General Font. He said afterward he was not confident that the Security Council would put the Irish question on its agenda.
Do you soak your dentures clean? You can brush them cleaner with Denture Cream. Look, we soaked that heavy lipstick stain, soaked it all night in the leading tablet cleanser. Even with soaking and vigorous brushing, that denture material is still stained. Now try Denture Cream, the powerful denture toothpaste. In no time, Denture Cream scrubs, brushes, polishes dentures clean, leaves your mouth toothpaste fresh. See the difference? Denture Cream outcleans your soak.
If you're a denture wearer and buying foods your whole family can eat but you can't because they loosen your dentures, you need Polygrip. What does Polygrip do that powder adhesives can't? Say this glass is your denture. Sprinkle on a powder adhesive. Press. At first it holds, but powders can weaken. Your dentures can let go. But not with Polygrip. No gaps, no letting go, no embarrassment. Get Polygrip and eat the same foods the rest of your family eats.
Army Secretary Stanley Reeser flew to Asia today, and one of his stops will be in Vietnam. There he plans to look into the Green Beret case, which is assuming the proportions of a major military mess. 8 Special Forces officers and men have been charged with killing a South Vietnamese who may have been a double agent. Today, the Army removed the 8 from the narrow hot cells in which they've been confined and put them in regular living quarters. B-52 bombers dropped more than 800 tons of bombs on enemy positions near the Cambodian border. There was little ground fighting. The United States soon must make a decision whether to remove more troops from the country. Meanwhile, most of the 25,000 who were supposed to be out of the country by the end of August are still there.
Last June at Midway, President Nixon announced U.S. troops in Vietnam would be reduced 25,000 by the end of August. In 10 weeks since, there have been parades and ceremonies, but to the embarrassment of personnel officers, the overall troop level at last report had dropped less than 3,000. That means the services must reduce by 22,000 more in less than 2 weeks. Activity is only slightly short of frantic. The problem comes from fluctuation in the daily flow in and out of country of hundreds of troops not involved in the withdrawal. Lately, many more have been coming than going. The military says for some reason replacements always swell in the summer. Efforts to break the trend have been slowed by mountains of unchangeable orders and military red tape. By now, the problem has grown so acute that hastily drawn new orders are being issued. Scores of extra outbound planes have been hired, and hundreds of soldiers are being readied for departure a few weeks ahead of schedule. Robert Hager, NBC News at Benoit Air Base outside Saigon.
Ever since the Midway meeting in June, President Nixon has been careful to say that American troops leaving Vietnam were being replaced, not withdrawn. Their replacements, of course, are the South Vietnamese, and some of them are being trained in this country.
In this particular operation,
Air Cadet Phan Van Ai of the South Vietnamese Air Force is learning to fly a helicopter to replace an American now fighting in his country.
125 pounds in 1 hour. Well, gentlemen, during the first period, then, we have discussed this VC situation we have in Tan Binh Dong.
I is one of 40 Vietnamese being trained at Fort Rucker. During his 32 weeks in the United States, I is given intensive classroom and flight instruction. When the course is completed, he'll be a fully qualified helicopter pilot. In the past 7 years, more than 300 Vietnamese have received helicopter training in this country. Now, as part of the plan to turn over more of the war to the Vietnamese, there'll be a dramatic increase. At the same time, fewer Americans will be going through helicopter training. It's the first time since the war began that there's been a decrease in the number of U.S. trainees. The Vietnamese cadets receive exactly the same instruction as the Americans. By the time the course is completed and the man is given his wings, he'll have logged 210 hours of flight time. All of the instructors are Americans. Practically all of them have served in Vietnam. They know the country of their students, and they know the kinds of combat conditions their students will face when they return home. Veterans say that much of the Alabama countryside resembles Vietnam in many ways. To make the training even more realistic, landing zones are hacked out of the pine forest to simulate the real thing. Training a helicopter pilot is expensive. It's estimated to run between $30,000 and $35,000 a man. That doesn't include the cost of the aircraft itself. Each of these Hueys cost nearly $250,000. One reason for the high cost of training is that the students fire live ammunition. Vietnamese helicopter trainees are considered to be among the best young men available. They'll be a part of an elite group when they return home. Their instructors feel they learn their job as well as anyone can. No one expects there'll be nearly as many Vietnamese as there are Americans now flying in Vietnam. When and if further U.S. withdrawals are made, the need for pilots will be greatly reduced. When the planned accelerated training program is completed, the South Vietnamese will be in a far better position to shoulder the main burden of fighting. Helicopters are an essential part of fighting the war in Vietnam. For the first time, the American Armed Forces are making a serious effort to train enough Vietnamese pilots to take on a major part of that war. Robert Gorelski, NBC News at Fort Rucker, Alabama.
Imagine spraying starch on a hot iron. But I'll do it to prove today's Easy on Speed starch is really different. It has the special GE silicone formula that prevents starch buildup. To prove how effective it is, let's spray here using Easy On without GE silicones. Now, let's see the difference. Look, with GE silicones, there's no starch buildup. Yes, Easy On won't build up, scorch, or stick. Guaranteed or money back. Try Easy On. It's different.
The story of Cinderella might never have been written if Cinderella had corns. Even so, there could have been a happy ending with Free Zone. Within days, Free Zone gets out the whole corn from top to bottom, so your feet can have a ball. Free Zone for happy endings. Gets out the whole corn from top to bottom.
The Huntley Brinkley Report continues, brought to you by Simmons, makers of the Hide-A-Bed sofa. When Simmons can give you just the sofa you want, isn't it nice it hides a bed, too?
These are sofas by Simmons, in every style and size and fabric you could want. Each one different, personalized, yours. But wait, there's something hiding in there. A bed. Hide-A-Bed sofas by Simmons. When Simmons can give you just the sofa you want, isn't it nice it hides a bed, too?
The government has ordered Mississippi to delay spending part of its federal school aid funds. Investigators say Mississippi is not dividing up state and local school aid equally among black and white children, and therefore is not entitled to federal money. It's the first time the government has tried to enforce this regulation. President Nixon today formalized his nomination of federal appeals judge Clement Haynesworth, Jr. to the Supreme Court. The nomination had been expected for more than a week. Haynesworth would fill the vacancy created by the resignation of Abe Fortas. The Senate Judiciary Committee has scheduled a hearing for September 9th, and civil rights groups said they would oppose the nomination. At his home in Greenville, South Carolina, Judge Haynesworth said he was honored by the nomination.
Judge Haynesworth said he would strive earnestly to justify the president's confidence, but the president may not want him to strive at anything too hard. Judge Haynesworth is largely unknown. He would take the so-called Jewish seat from which the court was led intellectually by Cardozo, Brandeis, and Frankfurter. Some administration members urged the appointment of a brilliant, hard-hitting conservative, but Mr. Nixon insisted on a quiet man who would not use the court to try to improve the world. Judge Haynesworth is considered to be that kind of man. At times, he opposed school integration, but he also ordered integration of the State Dental Society. As to law and order, his decisions expanded the rights of both police and criminals when he believed they should be expanded. The new court will line up about evenly split between liberals and conservatives, suggesting the president will not get the quiet court he is seeking. Carl Stern, NBC News, reporting.
The United Nations Command in Korea has asked for an Armistice Committee meeting at Panmunjom tomorrow to look into North Korea's shooting down of an American helicopter Sunday. There is no word on what happened to the 3 crewmen. Israel and Egypt spent another day firing artillery shells across the Suez Canal. And UN Secretary General Font today proposed stationing observers on the ceasefire line between Israel and Lebanon. Czechoslovak Communist Party leader Gustav Husak has scheduled a nationwide television speech tomorrow night, just before the anniversary of the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. In Philadelphia today, General Lyman Lemnitzer, Special Assistant to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, spoke at a VFW convention and talked about the Soviet invasion.
A year ago, every responsible official knew the Soviets could invade Czechoslovakia and that this capability was imminent. We did not, however, know that they would move to crush one of their own allies. The second lesson which we must draw is that the Soviet Union will not, where it believes its vital interests to be at stake, refrain from a sudden and overwhelming application of military power despite any and all written and oral assurances to the contrary. Now the question has been asked, and it is a fair one. What is the level of the threat posed to NATO by the Soviet Union and her satellites in Eastern Europe? The threat is a somber one. As I previously indicated, unlike the Western Allies, the Soviet Union did not demobilize after World War II. It was, and it continues to be, the tanks and the bayonets of the Soviet Army that extract from the nations behind the Iron Curtain that level of subservience needed to advance Soviet state policy.
Defense Secretary Laird, in a speech prepared for delivery tonight to the veterans of foreign wars, once more defended the military-industrial complex. Without it, he said, there would have been no moon landing or even a space program. Also, he said he has no intention of presiding over a dismantling of the armed forces below an adequate level of strength.
The tantalizing fragrance of Rapid Shave smells so good, you won't want to shave it off.
Smells so good, you won't want to shave it off. Smells so good, you won't want to shave it off. Smells so good.
Rapid Shave in juicy lime, tingling menthol mint, and the fresh wake-up fragrance of regular.
Smells so good, you won't want to shave it off.
Baggies are coming.
Plastic bags?
Not just bags, baggies.
Look how big Baggy sandwich size is.
Buy baggies.
Food wrap size also happens to be school book size.
Buy baggies.
Look, there's a Baggies jumbo size, too.
Buy baggies.
Those ever-loving baggies, there's a size for everything.
Dear Baggies, first name for plastic bags. Buy baggies.
Philip Blyberg was cremated today in Cape Town, South Africa. He died last night at the age of 60, 19 and a half months after becoming the world's third heart transplant patient. Dr. Christian Barnard said Blyberg's body rejected his new heart, and that caused his death. Barnard said he would continue to perform heart transplant operations. Dr. Denton Cooley, who has performed 19 heart transplants, said he would also continue such operations and work toward solving the problem of rejection. Mies van der Rohe, the architect, died yesterday in Chicago at the age of 83. More than any other architect who ever practiced, he left his mark on the urban landscape of the United States, from the Seagram Building in New York to apartments on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago. Prices rose today on the New York Stock Exchange. The Dow Jones Industrials gained almost 7 points, and an average share of common stock went up 30 cents. The folk rock music festival, which brought 350,000 people to a rural area 2 hours from New York City, finally ended at dawn's early light. But while the music is over, the aftertaste lingers on.
This is one reason Max Yasker's neighbors are upset because he leased his farm to a rock music festival. This is another. More than 350,000 people, mostly young people, showed up to hear the greatest rock groups in the country. The promoters billed it as 3 days of peace and music. And for most people, it was just that. Little thanks to the promoters. There were many problems, like not enough sanitation facilities, food, or water. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, dear. How long have you been here?
About 2 weeks.
Roberto's been here 3 weeks. I live here most of my life.
You're from Spain, right?
Yeah.
Are you enjoying the festival?
Yeah, it's outside. It's beautiful.
Why did you come to the festival?
To see the best music in the world, man. It's great. La música, no?
Claro.
He's a musician.
How about the problems that people have been talking about? Those things bother you? Water and shortage of food?
We've been locked out of our car without any money for 3 days. No sleeping bag, so I guess it isn't bothering us too much.
There were thousands of minor injuries and some major medical problems.
Well, like, it all comes down to, like, you know, taking care of yourself, man, you know. Like, all of us have to take care of ourselves, and some people know how and some people don't. Some people get out in the woods, they don't know how to live.
And there was, as one would expect with 350,000 20th century youth, drugs.
I think the thing is more people around here than Dopton.
You don't think it's getting out of hand?
No, I don't think anything's out of control. Everything I've seen has been a very together thing. It's turning people on to a different kind of living from the city. That's what's happening out here.
It'll be 2 or 3 days before all the people leave the peace and quiet of the Catskill Mountains. It may be longer before this area returns to normal. Despite the problems, and there were many problems, though they were not as great as many people believed, this weekend says a lot about the youth of America. More than 350,000 people came looking for peace and music. Many said they learned a lot about themselves and learned a lot about getting along together and priorities. And for most, that alone makes it all worthwhile. Lem Tucker, NBC News, in upstate New York.
Good night for NBC News.